Meet two people, same city, same income, same age, early 30s. Let's call them Jordan and Alex. Jordan just bought a home, 30-year mortgage, 20% down payment, monthly payment around $2,700. Jordan feels proud, settled, like the next chapter of life has finally started. Alex is still renting, $1,800 a month. No mortgage, no debt tied to a property. And the difference in monthly cost? Alex is investing that $900 every single month. 5 years later, Jordan's home has appreciated a bit. There's some equity building, but there have also been repairs. Property taxes went up, and the mortgage, it's still 25 years away from being paid off. Alex? That $900 a month invested consistently at 8% returns has quietly grown into something significant. Neither of them is wrong, but here's the question nobody actually asks. Did Jordan buy a home because the numbers made sense, or because it felt like the right thing to do? Because there's a version of this decision that's financial, and there's a version that's completely psychological, and most people are making it with the second one, while believing they're using the first. Hi, I'm Rishi, and today we're talking about one of the biggest financial decisions most people will ever make. Not just the math of renting versus buying, but the psychology behind how people actually make that choice. Because the numbers alone don't tell the whole story, and neither does the emotion. The real answer sits somewhere in the middle. Let's break it down properly. The story society tells you. At some point, someone told you that renting is throwing money away. Maybe a parent, maybe a relative, maybe just the general feeling in the air. And that idea stuck because it sounds logical. You're paying someone else's mortgage, you're building no equity, every month you rent, you have nothing to show for it. Except that's not entirely true, and it's worth understanding why that story exists. According to Psychology Today, home ownership in America has historically been treated as more than a financial decision. It's been tied to identity, status, achievement. It's been called part of the American dream. Presidents have literally declared National Home Ownership Month. That's not just finance, that's culture. And culture is powerful. When something is this deeply tied to how society sees success, your brain stops treating it as a choice. It starts treating it as an obligation. And that's where the psychology takes over. What your brain actually does. When you start thinking seriously about buying a home, something interesting happens. Your brain starts scanning for confirmation. You notice friends posting about their new homes. You see investment in every real estate ad. You replay the throwing money away line. Psychologists call this confirmation bias. Once your brain leans toward a decision, it starts collecting evidence to support it and quietly filtering out the evidence that doesn't. There's also something called present bias, studied extensively by behavioral economists David Leibson and Daniel Kahneman. It's the tendency to want emotional comfort now, even when it costs you later. The feeling of owning a home, the security, the permanence, the pride, is immediate. The financial cost of buying too early, in the wrong market or beyond your means, that comes later. And your brain is much better at feeling today than calculating tomorrow. So when people say they just knew it was time to buy, a lot of that is present bias talking. The real math. Let's be honest. Now let's actually look at the numbers, because this is where most people get surprised. According to a 2025 bank rate study covering all 50 major U.S. metros, average mortgage payments are about 38% higher per month than average rents. A separate analysis found that buying a home costs around 57% more per month than renting across 100 major cities. And the median home price in the U.S. as of mid-2025, around $435,000. With a 20% down payment, that's $87,000 up front. And at today's mortgage rates of roughly 6.5%, your monthly principal and interest payment alone comes to about $2,200. Add property taxes, homeowners insurance, and maintenance, and you're realistically looking at $2,700 to $3,000 a month versus the national average rent of around $20,000. That's a real gap. But here's what makes this complicated. The math doesn't just end there, because when you buy, part of that payment builds equity. Your home may appreciate over time, and over 10, 20, 30 years, that asset can become something very significant. According to Federal Reserve data, the median homeowner's net worth is around $400,000. Compare that to the median renter's net worth, about $10,400. That's an enormous gap. But before you take that number at face value, let's think about what it actually means. The part people skip. That net worth gap between owners and renters, it's real. But it doesn't mean buying is always smarter. It means that over time, owning a home forces a kind of wealth building that most renters don't replace. Because when you pay a mortgage every month, part of that goes to equity. It's almost like an involuntary savings account. Most renters, if they're being honest, don't take the money they save on housing and invest it consistently. But what if they did? Let's go back to Jordan and Alex. If Alex takes that $900 monthly difference and invests it every month at 8% average returns, after 30 years, that's over $1.3 million. Now Jordan's home, in the same period, assuming 3 to 4% annual appreciation on a $435,000 home, could be worth around $1.2 to $1.4 million. But Jordan also paid interest over 30 years, property taxes, maintenance costs, typically 1 to 2% of home value annually. That's $4,000 to $8,000 a year just in upkeep. When you account for all of that, the numbers get surprisingly close. Neither dramatically better, neither dramatically worse. It depends on the market, the timing, the interest rate, and most importantly, your life. The question nobody actually asks. Here's the thing most financial videos on this topic skip. The rent versus buy decision is not just a spreadsheet problem, it's a life design problem. So here are the real questions that matter. How long are you staying? This one is probably the biggest factor. Most financial experts point to something called the break-even horizon, the number of years you need to stay in a home for buying to actually make financial sense over renting. When you factor in closing costs, which run 2 to 5% of the purchase price, that's $8,750 to $21,750 on a median-priced home, just to get started. Add to that the transaction costs when you sell, and in most markets today, you need to stay at least 5 to 7 years for buying to clearly beat renting financially. If your job might move you, if your family situation might change, if you genuinely don't know where you want to be in 5 years, the numbers almost always favor renting. Not because buying is bad, but because the costs of buying and then selling quickly are brutal. Can you truly afford it? All of it, not just the mortgage, the full picture. Down payment, closing costs, monthly payment, maintenance, property taxes, emergency repairs, and still have an emergency fund left over. If buying a home wipes out your savings and leaves you with zero financial cushion, that's not a smart purchase. That's just a very expensive form of stress. Is your reason financial or emotional? Be honest with yourself here. Are you buying because the numbers genuinely work for your situation, or because you feel like you should by now? Because your parents did it at your age? Because your friends just did it? Because renting feels temporary and you want to feel settled? Those are real feelings. They're not wrong feelings, but they're not financial reasons. And making a $400,000 decision primarily because of social pressure is a recipe for regret. What renting actually gives you? Let's flip the narrative for a second, because renting gets too much negativity. When you rent, you have flexibility. If a better opportunity shows up in another city, you can move. If your income changes, you're not locked into a payment that doesn't move. If the market drops, you don't feel it directly. You also have liquidity. That $89,000 down payment sitting in an investment account instead of a house, it's working for you. Growing, accessible if you need it. And your monthly maintenance costs? When the boiler breaks at 2 a.m., you call the landlord, not a repair company. That's not nothing. Renting is perfectly legitimate financial strategy for the right person at the right time. But buying has things renting genuinely cannot offer. Stability. Nobody's raising your mortgage rate the way a landlord raises rent. That payment is yours. Fixed. Predictable. And there's something psychological about that is actually valuable. You can paint the walls, renovate the kitchen, Put roots somewhere. Make a place truly yours. That's not just emotional fluff. A stable home environment affects your mental health, your relationships, your sense of identity in a real way. And over a long enough time horizon, in the right market at the right price, buying builds wealth in a way that's almost automatic. Because every month, like clockwork, equity grows, even when you're not thinking about it. The psychology of timing. The psychology of timing. One more thing worth talking about. The feeling that you're behind if you haven't bought yet. This is very common, and it's very much a psychological trap. Research on social comparison, first studied by psychologist Leon Festinger, shows that we evaluate our own milestones not by our own situation, but by what we see others doing. Someone close to you buys a house, and suddenly you feel like you're falling behind. Even if, financially, you're in a completely different situation, even if your path is genuinely different. That comparison feeling is real, but it's not data. It's not a signal that you should buy. It's just your brain measuring itself against someone else's life. The right time to buy a home is when your finances are genuinely ready, your life situation supports it, the market and the math make sense for your city and your timeline, not when Instagram makes you feel like you should. The real answer. So back to Jordan and Alex. 5-10 years down the road, neither of them necessarily made the wrong choice. Jordan bought because the stability, the roots, the long-term plan, all of it genuinely fit. Alex rented because flexibility, lower costs, and investing the difference, all of it genuinely fit. Both can build wealth. Both can live well. The difference is not the decision itself. The difference is whether the decision was made clearly or emotionally. Whether it was built on your actual numbers or what the world told you to do by a certain age. So here's the only question that actually matters. If you removed the social pressure, if no one had an opinion, if it was purely about your life, your finances, your goals, what would you actually choose? Because that answer is probably the right one. If this helped you think about this differently, don't forget to like and subscribe. See you in the next one. Goodbye.